Hello and welcome to my submission for exam number 2. Today I will be covering the Recovering America's Wildlife Act, or RAWA. RAWA is a bill that was introduced into the Senate in March of this year. The main objective of RAWA is to provide additional funds for proactive wildlife management. So the idea here is to conserve wildlife populations that are at risk or that are declining and conserve them before they decline to the point that they would have to be listed under the Endangered Species Act. So to achieve these goals, functionally, RAWA is just an amendment to the Pittman-Robertson Act, which is the primary funding channel for state wildlife management. So RAWA creates a new sub-account under Pittman-Robertson, and this account is just filled with funds, money from the federal general fund each year that will total $1.3 billion annually, and about $100 million of that fund would be specifically directed towards tribal wildlife agencies, and additionally 10% of the sub-account would be put towards a program that would offer grants for collaborative regional wildlife conservation ventures. RAWA had a previous version. So in 2016 it was initially brought to Congress. In April 2021 the first official draft was introduced to the House of Representatives. By June of 2022, it had passed the House and been received by the Senate. Then in December of 2022, the bill failed in the Senate due to concerns about the funding mechanism. Then in March of 2023, it was reintroduced as a new version, and it has currently been assigned to the Environment and Public Works Committee. Now, in order for RAWA to eventually become law, it would need to be revised by the Senate to address those previous concerns, the reason it failed in the Senate before, and then once it was reworked, it would be reviewed by the House before it could potentially be codified into law. Overall, RAWA has been very well regarded. It has received broad bipartisan support, and really the only opposition is concerns over this funding mechanism, which was the reason that it failed in that first version. So the way the bill was written was that the general fund was going to be supplied by revenue from this new regulation put in place on cryptocurrency, and that's where the funding would ultimately be coming from that would support RAWA programs. So the bill was of course passed by the House previously, but when it reached the Senate, the senators couldn't reach a consensus on whether this funding source was going to be adequate for this ambitious bill, and if this was truly a feasible and reasonable funding mechanism. Well, I'm a resident of South Carolina, so I just wanted to point out that one of the co-sponsors is my Senator Lindsey Graham. He actually co-sponsored the previous version of RAWA as well as the current version of RAWA. Additionally, Lindsey Graham sits on the Committee for Public Works in the Senate, which RAWA has been assigned to. And while Senator Graham has not sponsored any relevant environmental bills similar to this, he has co-sponsored a number of bills, and just in the current congressional session, he has co-sponsored a Sea Turtle Rescue Assistance Act, Coastal Habitat Conservation Act, and others. So I'm optimistic that Senator Graham will encourage continuing action on this bill and would vote in favor when the time comes. So how does RAWA fit into the current system for funding proactive wildlife conservation? So since 2000, the funding for these types of projects has come through the State and Tribal Wildlife Grants Program. This is a program that is funded through the federal budget. About $75 million per year is apportioned for these grants, although the amount is a little bit variable from year to year. And although it's not nearly enough money for each of the states and tribes to meet all of their wildlife conservation goals for at-risk species, they have accomplished some really, really important and impressive things. So collectively, the states have recognized 12,000 at-risk species and the conservation actions that they require. And these grants have also awarded over $100 million to support 500 projects in tribal wildlife agencies. One of the requirements for states to receive the State and Tribal Wildlife Grant Program money was that the states have to write a State Wildlife Action Plan, or a SWAP. And so at this point, all 50 states have created a SWAP. It is you could view it as the culmination of all the knowledge and research that they've done and gained about wildlife residing within each state. And so each of these comprehensive state-specific plans will specifically list which species are of various concern rankings, and then very importantly, it outlines the actions that are necessary for each of those species in order to conserve them or protect them from further declines or needing to be listed as threatened or endangered. So if RAWA were to pass, how would that interact with the state and tribal wildlife grants and the SWAPs? So essentially, RAWA would be supplementary funds for helping achieve the same goals as the state and tribal wildlife grants. So RAWA would be in addition to the existing funding, and most importantly, RAWA would of course be a huge infusion of cash that would far more than double the available funds that each state or tribe would have to basically put their state wildlife action plans into action. To sum up the topic of RAWA and bring it close to home for me, I'll highlight 2 species of conservation concern in my state. The first would be the diamondback terrapin. So this species was petitioned to be listed under the Endangered Species Act in 2011, but fortunately, due to state wildlife grants, the state of South Carolina was able to do enough research and conservation efforts to avoid having to list the species. One of the successful conservation efforts is the use of these turtle excluder devices on crab pots. It prevents the turtles from getting into the crab pot and drowning, which is unfortunately a big source of mortality for them. The second species is the spotted turtle. This one's very close to home for me. Just a few miles from my house this spring, I found the first record of a spotted turtle in my county, and this is my photo of that turtle, but it was in a little urban creek that was surrounded by development on all sides. This is a high priority species that's often captured for pet trade, and so I'm a little worried about, apparently there's a bog turtle population that's right in this little high traffic creek area. But these 2 species are great examples of species that can really benefit from funding sources like RAWA. Here are my references, and thank you for listening to my talk.